So you want to own a landscaping business. Buy a truck, a trailer, a few mowers and trimmers, hire a couple guys who don't mind working in the heat, and start cutting grass for whatever the neighborhood will pay. That's the picture in your head. Low startup cost, simple product, everybody with a yard needs it mowed. Here's the problem. Landscaping has one of the lowest barriers to entry of any small business in America, which sounds like an advantage until you realize that's exactly why it's also one of the most brutally competitive and thinnest margin industries you can walk into. A landscaping business is not really a lawn care business. It is a logistics and labor scheduling business, wearing work boots. And the moment you understand that difference, everything about how a landscaping company makes money and how it quietly stalls out at the exact same revenue ceiling year after year starts to make sense. Let's start with the price list, because just like every asset we've broken down before, landscaping companies come in tiers, and the tier you build determines everything else about the business sitting underneath it. At the bottom sits the solo operator. One truck, one trailer, one person doing every single job themselves. A business you can genuinely start for under $20,000 in used equipment and basic insurance. Above that sits the small crew operation, 2 or 3 trucks running simultaneously, a handful of employees, requiring real investment in commercial equipment, liability insurance, and enough working capital to cover payroll during slow weeks, typically $100,000 to $300,000 to run properly. At the top sits the full-service landscape and grounds maintenance company, the kind that holds commercial contracts with office parks, HOAs, and municipalities, running a dozen or more crews with specialized divisions for design, installation, irrigation, and snow removal. Businesses that can generate several $1,000,000 a year in revenue, but require real management infrastructure to hold together. Each of these is really a different bet on the same underlying question. Are you selling your own physical labor by the hour, or are you building a company that can eventually run without you standing in the yard yourself? Now here's where the naive mental model falls apart immediately. You assume the expensive part is the equipment, the mowers, the trucks, the trimmers. It matters, but it's rarely what actually determines whether a landscaping company survives its first 5 years. The genuinely dangerous cost sitting underneath this entire industry is seasonality, because unlike a gym or a roofing company that at least has some baseline of year-round demand, landscaping revenue in most of the country follows a brutal seasonal curve, with the overwhelming majority of annual revenue concentrated into a 6 to 8 month growing season, and in colder climates, 3 to 4 winter months where mowing revenue effectively drops to zero. This creates a cash flow problem that catches nearly every first-time owner off guard, because payroll, insurance, equipment loan payments, and fuel costs don't pause just because the grass stopped growing, and a business that looked comfortably profitable in July can find itself burning through its entire cash reserve by February, waiting for the season to start again. This is exactly why smart operators in colder and mixed climates build a second business inside the first one, snow removal, and it's one of the more interesting structural quirks of this entire industry. A landscaping company with the right equipment, plow attachments, salt spreaders, and standing contracts with the same commercial clients it mows for in summer can turn its dead winter months into a genuinely profitable season on their own, sometimes generating 20 to 40% of total annual revenue in just a few winter months. But snow removal comes with its own volatility that mirrors the oil rig or the private military company we've broken down before, because revenue is tied almost entirely to a variable nobody controls: how much it actually snows that year. A light winter with 2 or 3 storms can leave a company that invested heavily in plow equipment sitting on expensive idle machinery, generating almost no revenue, while a brutal winter with a dozen major storms can generate a windfall that single-handedly funds the entire following growing season. And this weather dependency is precisely why year-round landscape companies treat snow contracts less like guaranteed income and more like a lottery ticket with decent odds. Then there's the labor problem, and this is where the industry's structural fragility really shows itself. Landscaping is physically demanding, seasonal, often outdoors in extreme heat, and has struggled for years to attract enough domestic workers to meet demand, which has pushed a significant share of the industry towards seasonal guest worker visa programs to fill crews during peak season. Navigating that visa system adds real administrative cost and legal complexity that a solo operator running one truck simply doesn't have to deal with, but a growing multi-crew company increasingly can't avoid, and the annual cap on those visa allocations means companies sometimes cannot secure enough approved workers for their busiest months, no matter how much they're willing to pay, creating a genuine capacity ceiling that has nothing to do with demand for the work itself. On top of that, turnover in entry-level landscaping labor runs extremely high industry-wide, and every departing worker represents lost training investment and a scramble to fill a crew slot in the middle of the busiest weeks of the year, when finding replacement labor is hardest and most expensive. So where does the actual revenue come from? And this is where landscaping splits into several genuinely different businesses under one company name. The first and most common is recurring maintenance. Mowing, edging, trimming, and basic upkeep billed on a weekly or bi-weekly contract throughout the growing season, the steady, predictable bread and butter of the industry, but also the most heavily commoditized and price-competitive segment, because a homeowner comparing 3 mowing quotes is often comparing services that look functionally identical, forcing operators into thin margins just to win the contract at all. The second and far more profitable channel is landscape design and installation, one-time larger projects, new plant beds, hardscaping, patios, retaining walls, irrigation system installation, where margins run dramatically higher than routine mowing, because the client is paying for expertise and a finished creative outcome rather than a commodity service they could theoretically do themselves with a rented mower. This is exactly the same dynamic we saw in original equipment versus replacement tires, or retail versus insurance-driven roofing work. The recurring commodity service builds the customer base and cash flow, while the higher-margin project work is where real profit actually accumulates. The third channel, and increasingly the most valuable for companies that can win it, is commercial and HOA contract work, multi-year agreements with office parks, apartment complexes, and homeowners associations that provide dramatically more revenue stability than chasing individual residential customers door to door, because losing one HOA contract that represents 50 individual properties is a single sales conversation rather than 50 separate ones, and commercial clients tend to be far less price-sensitive on a per-property basis than an individual homeowner comparing quotes for their own backyard. Now let's talk about margins, because this is where the gap between a landscaping business that survives and one that quietly grinds its owner into the ground for years becomes visible. Fuel costs alone can swing meaningfully year to year and directly eat into margin on a business running multiple trucks and dozens of pieces of gas-powered equipment across a full season. Equipment itself depreciates fast under heavy commercial use, and a commercial-grade zero-turn mower running daily through a full growing season might need meaningful engine and deck maintenance within just a few years, while a full crew's worth of trucks, trailers, and equipment represents a genuinely significant capital investment that has to be replaced on a rolling cycle just to keep crews productive and reliable. Liability insurance runs higher than many people expect too, given that landscaping crews operate power equipment on other people's property daily, with real risk of property damage, from a rock kicked through a window by a mower blade to a severed irrigation line, alongside genuine physical injury risk from operating chainsaws, mowers, and trimmers for a living. Add fuel, equipment maintenance and replacement, insurance, and payroll together, and a well-run maintenance-focused landscaping route might net somewhere in the range of 15 to 25% gross margin on recurring mowing work, a number that sounds reasonable until you remember how much of that margin depends on route density, meaning how tightly packed your daily job schedule is geographically, because every mile a crew drives between properties is time and fuel spent generating zero revenue at all. This route density problem is genuinely one of the most underappreciated economic realities in this entire industry, because two landscaping companies can have the exact same number of customers paying the exact same rates and produce wildly different profit, purely based on whether those customers are clustered tightly in a few neighborhoods or scattered across an entire metro area. A crew that can complete 15 properties in a tight cluster in one day is dramatically more profitable per labor hour than a crew driving 45 minutes between scattered stops to service the same 15 properties. Which is exactly why experienced operators are often willing to walk away from a new customer entirely if that customer sits far outside their existing service routes, understanding correctly that an isolated account, even a well-paying one, can quietly destroy the profitability of an entire day's schedule. The case studies in this industry tend to fall into two categories worth understanding before anyone buys their first commercial mower. The first is the solo operator who scales too fast, hiring several crews and taking on significant equipment debt to chase growth, without building the systems, route optimization software, dispatch management, and financial controls needed to actually run a multi-crew operation profitably, ending up managing chaos rather than a business, with revenue climbing while actual owner profit stays flat or shrinks because overhead grew faster than efficiency did. The second is the operator who deliberately stayed disciplined, building density in a defined service area before expanding geographically, investing in commercial contracts that smooth out seasonal cash flow, and gradually building a management layer that allows the owner to step back from actually running a mower personally, eventually building a business that can be sold as a genuine operating company rather than simply liquidated for its used equipment when the owner wants to retire. Time to pull it all together and answer the actual question: how much money do you make if you do this right? In the realistic small operator scenario, a 2 or 3 crew business focused on tight route residential maintenance can generate somewhere between $300,000 and $700,000 in annual revenue. Netting a genuine 10 to 20% owner profit once every truck payment, insurance premium, and payroll cost is accounted for, a real but modest small business return, heavily dependent on the owner still working significant hours inside the business, rather than purely managing it from above. In the scaled commercial-focused scenario, a company that's built a real base of HOA and commercial maintenance contracts, alongside a genuine winter snow removal division, can push past $1 million in annual revenue with meaningfully better margins, because recurring commercial contracts and high-margin snow work both smooth out the brutal seasonality that traps smaller residential-only operators every single winter. So if you do decide to start a landscaping business, remember the one thing that actually determines whether you succeed. It was never really about how well you can cut a straight line across a lawn. It's about how tightly you can cluster your routes and how well you can survive the months when the grass simply isn't growing. Because in this industry, geography and the calendar decide your profit far more than your mower ever will.